Ministry. Thank you for joining us this summer for our 4-part series on how cooking can be a form of prayer, especially when we bring together family and friends and we consciously make God a part of the conversation. And we bring him to the table, but we also bring him to the stovetop, to our countertop, and we make that conversation flow in the direction of joy, in the good news of the gospel, and in terms of the many representations of God that come to us through the lives of saints. Today we're going to keep with that tradition by making a Filipino pork stew, inspired by a friend of mine in college who used to make it quite often, and especially in honor of Saint Lorenzo Ruiz of Manila. He was the Philippines' first saint. He was born in 1594. He died in 1627. And his life and identity in many respects represent how the Philippines are a crossroads of cultures and of histories. His father was Chinese, his mother was a native Tagalog speaker of the Philippine Islands, and they were raised and lived under Spanish colonial rule. So we're going to hear more about that later, and now we're going to be joined by some friends from Family Ministry who are going to help me make this recipe. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoyed this, the last of our cooking series, and that you'll be with us in the fall as we continue to have more video activities and ideas on our website.
We are family.
I love it. So this is our group of family ministers who are going to help us today. I wonder if you could introduce yourselves. We'll start with Tina.
Hi, I'm Tina. I'm Diana. I'm Sophia.
I'm Chris.
And does anybody have experience eating or cooking Filipino food?
No. Oh, wait. Yes. I have eaten.
Awesome.
And it's awesome.
Yes, it is. So let's get to it. What do you say?
Yay, let's do it.
Well, I wanted to show you the ingredients to begin with, and in fact it's very simple, although for some of us who are less familiar with Latin American or Spanish or Asian cuisine might see that there are a lot of ingredients here. They're actually fewer in number than if it were a Cuban dish, for instance, making a pork stew. So what we have is first the pork. And I wanted you to see that it's a whole loin like this, about 3 pounds. We're making a heck of a lot of it, so I got about 5 pounds of pork loin here. And you're gonna be using the soy sauce that is gluten-free, but any soy sauce works, garlic, beef broth. The real key ingredient that makes it very Filipino is the ginger. And then the combination of ginger, garlic, cloves, dried plums, the onion, and then the red tomato is really a spectacular combination. But what makes it very Filipino is in fact that combination of butter as the main oil with a little bit of olive oil added, and then the fact that you have this ginger in there at all with soy sauce. If it were a Spanish dish or a Cuban dish, undoubtedly we'd be using salt, but we'd also probably be using an olive, or we'd be using red wine and olives as a savory kind of a taste or a set of ingredients to add. So these are all the things you need, and as always, our recipe will be at the bottom of the screen for you to get and copy and download on your own. So Tina, what you got there?
Pork tenderloin.
It's actually pork loin.
Oh, pork loin.
Pork loin. An important note, we're not using tenderloin because we're going to slow cook this. However, if you want the pork to be cooked a lot faster, you can use tenderloin, and in the recipe we will include instructions in case you want to use tenderloin. Pork loin has a little bit more flavor, and it has very little fat, especially if you buy the kind that has already the fat trimmed off at the top. So how are you cutting it there?
In chunks and then quarters.
Perfect. So they're cubed.
Cubed.
And in the end, I think we're going to be able to use probably only about 4 pounds of the big amount that I bought. But that's going to fill our pot, and that's what we want to do. So what do you have there?
I have onions. I actually have 2 types of onions. The green onions and your regular white onions.
Exactly, and you're going to want to chop those pretty small. So I would say not minced, but diced would be perfect. And we're going to be browning those onions right after we sear the meat in the same pot, so it's going to absorb the flavor of the meat, and vice versa eventually.
So we have fresh ginger that we're going to add to our recipe. It peels better when it's fresh, and there's different ways of peeling it. You can use a spoon, which is from advice from Tina. You could use a knife or a peeler. So I'm going to try all 3 ways and see which works best for me.
Hey Diana, tell us about the ginger.
Okay, well, we are grating the ginger, being very careful as we do it, because we don't want it to get hurt.
It's a pretty dangerous piece of equipment there, you know?
I think it
You
is.
might break a nail. The last couple of ingredients that are really key here are garlic and prunes. And what we're doing there is slicing the prunes. What are you doing there, Tina?
I'm just slicing the prunes in half.
Yeah, and now prunes are very sweet. They're not as sweet as raisins. In a Spanish or a Latin American dish, you would put raisins in. In this dish, no raisins, prunes. You might notice there are no peppers because, again, this is a Filipino dish. And what we're asking Chris to do is pretty special. You want to tell us about that?
I am thinly slicing garlic.
Yes, thinly sliced. And that is what's going to enable us to toast it without burning it. And then we're going to throw all that into a pot.
Okay, so we are going to need 4 cups of beef broth and 1 cup of soy sauce.
And we're using low sodium beef broth just because in general we want to make sure we balance the amount of salt we have in the dish. And that soy sauce is full flavor, so that means that it is not low sodium. We've also let the pork rest and we sprinkled it with a little bit of salt, but literally just a little bit. There's an old tradition of letting your meat rest with a little bit of salt to pull out any kind of bitterness from the meat. And so we're gonna find that that meat in a couple of minutes more will have released a liquid, and we're gonna dry it on paper towels before we sear it.
All right, so this is after we've grated it. We've already separated out some of what is fibrous. The older the piece of ginger is, the more fiber, the more dry it is, and then the more fiber you'll find. So we did pretty well with this stuff because it's more fresh.
And how many prunes do you think you sliced up there?
We did half the container. This is 18-ounce container, and I did half the container, sliced them in half.
Okay, perfect. And let's look at that wonderful garlic.
That is 10 wonderful thinly sliced garlic cloves. Not full cloves, right?
Yeah, those are full, well, they are full cloves.
There you go.
Yeah,
You can read the newspaper with that.
you could. And so the more transparent, the better, because they will get crispy and they will not burn because of the size. You're going to see it's great.
Okay, we're going to turn this on high, and we put 2 tablespoons of ghee in the pot, and then we're going to do 2 tablespoons of olive oil.
Excellent.
I guess we're on
And you can
this.
just kind of eyeball it.
And then we've already taken some paper towels and dried our pork a little bit.
Perfect. And so ghee is just clarified butter. You could use regular butter, but this will cook faster because it doesn't have any solids in it. It's just been melted, and then it's been passed through a sieve, and then it's been resolidified. So it has sort of all you want in butter without the solid. So it's going to cook it around the same temperature. So when that's all melted, we will toss that meat in and just let it sear. Well, that looks great. As much as you can get, you want to put just 1 layer into the very, very hot oil. And you want to move it as little as possible once it's in there. So she's just making room there to put as many chunks as she can. If you can't get them all in, it's okay. You'll just have a different texture to some of the chunks of meat. But what we want to do is sear it so that you can caramelize the surface of the meat. As you do that, some of the water will recede and it'll get kind of crunchy and charred on the exterior. And then it just adds flavor to the dish and textures to the dish. Now, if you were going to use pork tenderloin, you would want to definitely sear it, or in the end, after you cooked it, it would come out like shredded pork as opposed to chunks of pork, and what we want is chunks. So the idea here is to leave it for a very long time and just sort of ignore it. And it will cook itself, and as it does, the water will boil off, or some of it will boil off, and you will know because it'll start to smell cooked. And then you just turn it once, or if it's nice and browned on one side, you just throw it in the pot. All right, so now we are toasting the garlic. We're going to be using a fork to do that, because what we want to do is actually not use the oil. We're just going to end up using the toasted garlic in the recipe. So you can move it around. And what are we going to do after it's toasted?
We are going to strain it into this bowl, and we're going to save the garlic and use that, but not the oil.
Perfect.
And you need like what looks like 8 to 8.5 gallons of oil.
You use about 3 tablespoons. It's a very small little iron pan. It's starting to look done. Now the garlic will continue to cook as long as you keep it in there, and you don't want to burn it. So I would say that would be good. Yeah. Excellent. So that wonderful garlic infused olive oil has no salt in it. You can use it to make other dishes. You can dip your bread in it. You can add salt, spices, and make garlic bread with it. It's wonderful. And over here, we are doing great on the searing of the pork. I need a spoon. That works. So we're going to show you how brown that is. Or I'm going to try to show you that. Okay, so we have put the onions into the drippings from the pork, and we removed the pork and put all of the pork in here. And now, what are we going to add there?
We're going to add some thyme.
Thyme.
About a teaspoon.
Then you're going to do pretty much the same thing. That was about a tablespoon of thyme. Yeah, and that's the only herb we're going to put in. Some people like to put in oregano. I think it's a little too strong and overpowering, so we're just going to keep it with thyme. And then we're just going to leave the onions kind of like we left the meat, so that they caramelize. And I want to show you our spectacular toasted garlic. So we've separated it, as you saw. Chris separated it, and that's just going to go straight into the pot. And we're seconds away from assembling the whole dish and putting it to cook. All right, so we have everything in the pot now. We have the pork, we have the onions, we have the prunes, we have 3 cloves, 1 clove for each pound. We have 2 cans of whole plum tomatoes that we have just sliced in half. We put some thyme and the soy sauce and the beef broth, and pretty much we're ready to go. And we also put the garlic. So now all we have to do is heat this up. So if you were gonna make this in a regular pot, we're using a pressure cooker. In a regular pot, you would just wanna boil it and then reduce the heat, cover it, and keep it at a rolling boil, but over slow heat for about an hour and a half. And then you're going to reduce the liquid because it's going to have more liquid at the end than you want. And we're going to make it in a pressure cooker. So it's going to be ready in about half that time, maybe 40 minutes. And then we'll do the same thing, we'll reduce it. So you'll get to come back and see it completely cooked. In 1594, when Saint Lorenzo Ruiz was born in Manila, Spanish control over the vast archipelago of the Philippines had only recently taken root. In 1565, a Spanish military expedition, accompanied by Franciscan friars, had brutally repressed the coastal and lowland areas from Luzon to northern Mindanao. Never numbering more than 1% of the population over the next several centuries of colonial rule, Spaniards governed the Philippines with a heavy fist and very little oversight from the Spanish crown. They made great fortunes for themselves through outright bribery, piracy, and control over trade, particularly with Spanish and Chinese merchants across the Pacific to Spanish colonies in America. Because native Filipinos were subject to paying tribute in the form of unpaid labor on great estates, most were only nominal converts to Christianity. In this respect, St. Lorenzo's family was different. Both his father and his mother were deeply Catholic, and he grew up speaking not only his father's native language, Mandarin Chinese, but the local dominant language of Tagalog, thanks to his mother. As a catechumen, Lorenzo learned Spanish from Dominican priests at Manila's Church of Binondo, which is now his major shrine. In fact, the young Lorenzo so impressed the friars that he became their escribano, or parish record keeper and scribe for the church. Through his activities at the head of a cofradia, a sort of 17th century version of family ministry, Lorenzo eventually met and married a Tagalog woman named Rosario, or Rosary, with whom he had 3 children. By all accounts, Lorenzo led a blessed, if ordinary, life until 1636. Then suddenly, everything changed. One night, a brawl between 2 drunken Spanish sailors resulted in the death of one and the escape of the murderer. More interested in creating an image of order than they were in catching the real killer, Spanish authorities were desperate to make an arrest. If the victim was a Spaniard, someone had to hang. In many ways, punishing a non-European served Spanish interests more than condemning a fellow European for a European's death. Although we don't know the precise circumstances of what happened, it seems that St. Lorenzo Ruiz quickly became a convenient fall guy. As a cherished member of the Catholic Dominican order, his loyalty to secular authorities was suspect. Most Spaniards also saw him as a mixed-breed racial mongrel. For them, Lorenzo's Chinese ancestry served as proof of an innate instinct to deceive. His mother's native ancestry served as proof of an innate instinct to betray. Ultimately, 3 Dominican friars, a Japanese priest, and a leper named Lazarus came to Lorenzo's aid. They helped Lorenzo escape execution by giving him asylum and then inviting him to join them on an evangelizing mission to Japan. It is unlikely that Lorenzo did not know the implications of that request. In 1597, the local rulers of Japan, called shoguns, had arrested, tortured, and publicly paraded and then crucified 6 Franciscans and 20 Japanese Christians. By the time of Lorenzo's presumed arrest and execution in 1636, when the missionary ship left Manila, the persecution of Christian converts in Japan was taking place on a massive scale. Virtually all of Japan's 50,000 baptized Christians had been dispersed or exterminated in the shogun's vast campaign to root out what they saw as an alien pacifist faith that could only serve as a precursor to a European colonization of Japan. When Lorenzo and his holy companions arrived in Japan, they were almost immediately arrested and subject to unspeakable forms of torture. After huge amounts of water were forced down their throats, they were made to lie down with long boards over their stomachs. Then guards jumped on the boards, forcing the water to spurt violently from the mouth, the nose, and the ears. After the Dominican superior died under this torture, St. Lorenzo and his 4 companions were put to death by being hanged upside down in individual pits, an extremely painful and slow method. Tightly bound with heavy stones fitted around their waists to increase the pressure to the head, the victim is also left with one hand free so that he can signal his willingness to surrender his belief in Jesus Christ. St. Lorenzo never did. Neither did any one of his companions. Inscribed by his torturers, St. Lorenzo's dying words were, "I am a Catholic and wholeheartedly accept death for God. Had I 1,000 lives, all these to him shall I offer." St. Lorenzo Ruiz was canonized by Pope John Paul II in 1987. Okay, so this is our fabulous guisado de puerco, which shortly we will learn how to say in Tagalog. But you can see that everything is nice and cooked. It's not falling apart. You don't want it to fall apart. You want those prunes to be nice and plumped up like that. And what we're gonna do is thicken this for about 20 minutes and then we just dish it up. All right, so this is our final version of the stew and it's just delectable. Let's see if we get some footage of the reactions. Oops, and I don't trip over everything on the way there. So yeah, let's see.
2 thumbs up.
So I promised that the ginger would not be overwhelming, and it's not at all, right? It's like it's completely melded to the rest of the ingredients. Very unique. The
I don't
Philippines.
think we made enough.
I don't think so either. We got at least a gallon left.
Bless us, O Lord, in these thy gifts which we are about to receive from thy bounty through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Dear God, I would like to thank you for bringing us together today for this wonderful meal, and thank you for Lily and Elias hosting us for this wonderful meal.
Amen.
Amen.
In the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And of course, Lisa had to be included